Good evening, salam to everybody joining us today. I wanted to thank each one of you for taking the time to speak to us. I do want to especially recognize Representative Kwan, who had a major family loss by her brothers passing away, who was an icon in himself. I am requesting Abid from our team to lead a short prayer to commiserate his death, and so that we can all take a moment to pray with Representative Kwan.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اجعل روحه تركض في سلام، أعطي الصبر والسلوان لأهله. يعوضكم الله خيرا مما أخذ منكم. عظم الله أجركم وصبركم على فراقه.
Amen. Thank you. I also wanted to recognize that one of our other representative, Senator Ayamoto, was not able to join. We had miscommunication with her timing. We do apologize. Our want was to have each one of members of the ethnically diverse representatives, but sometimes the time kind of doesn't allow that. I want to once again welcome everybody and start by introducing our 5 legislators present. I would ask Senator Escamilla if she could introduce her district and a few words about herself, and then I'll call on to the next one. Thank you.
Thank you, Luna, and thank you, everyone. My name is Luz Escamilla. I'm the state senator representing Senate District 1. Senate District 1 is the west side of Salt Lake City, so west of I-15 in Salt Lake City and about half of West Valley City. And I've been the state senator in this district for the last 12 years. Excited to be and humble for the opportunity to serve not only the constituency of Senate District 1, but many other communities that I culturally identified with as a woman of color. I'm an immigrant from Mexico. And so I share a lot of similarities and identity with communities that are, newcomers to this country as an immigrant myself. And also, been working on issues related to social justice since I was in college at the University of Utah with Representative Romero. We went to school together. It's Utah is a small world, so we tend to connect in many ways. But I graduated from the University of Utah, and I, like I said, been in the legislature, but also been working in the private sector. I work for Zions Bank, and about to make a transition to a new position in the private sector as well. But I, been excited for. At one point, I was a director for the State Office of Ethnic Affairs for Governor Huntsman, and I know how important it is to have conversations and inclusiveness and the opportunity to have communities participate of civic dialogue and engagement. So thank you again for the opportunity to be here tonight.
Hi to the little one right next to you. Thank you, Senator Escamilla. Representative Hollands.
Hi, I am Utah State Representative Sandra Hollands. I represent District 23, which is the northwest side of Salt Lake City. Senator Escamilla is my senator, and so I have the pleasure of representing some of the same constituents, and my district butts up right next to Representative Romero's district, and we share Poplar Grove area. I have been serving in the as a state legislator since 2015. I was elected in 2014. As some of you may know, I am the first Black American woman, we've had men, woman ever elected to a state level position in this state. And so my election was historical. My background, I am a licensed clinical social worker. A lot of my work has been done with those experiencing homelessness and a lot with those who are in poverty. That has been my focus when I decided to go into social work. I went into that career wanting to focus on those populations. That's where my passion lies. I have done work around social justice issues at the Capitol. I've done work around the school of prison pipeline. I've looked at how do we get those who are formerly incarcerated back into the workforce services. And most recently, I ran a bill banning chokehold, law enforcement for using chokeholds as a form of restraint. So I'm looking forward to having this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Representative Kwan?
Thank you very much for having me here and for setting this up. And thank you so much for the lovely prayer. My family actually, Michael's family just came over for dinner, so they're over eating outside. So I had to move to another area. So sorry for the strange background, but I serve in mostly Taylorsville, but also I have parts of West Valley and Murray and Mill Creek. I've been in the legislature since 2018, and that is not correct. Since 2016, and serve in leadership. Senator Escamilla talked about what a small world it is, and it certainly is. I was their advisor, one of their advisors when they were Representative Romero and Senator Escamilla were at the University of Utah. So our worlds have crossed paths for about 30 years now. My background is in psychology. That's what I teach at Salt Lake Community College. But my doctorate is in educational leadership and policy. And my background in advocacy, my entire career here in Utah has been working with the Asian and Pacific Islander communities. Although while I was at the University of Utah, I worked with all ethnic groups. So my passion is also for advocacy and social justice. And so I'm very happy to be here with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Representative Romero?
Thank you, Luna. Thank you for having us here today. As Representative Kwan mentioned, she was I started college when I was 17, and she was one of my first academic advisors. And Representative Wheatley has been involved in the community forever, and Representative Hollands and Senator Escamilla, all of us have worked together. So we've known each other not quite 30 years, but close to it. But my name is Angela Romero, and I serve in House District 26. That is Glendale, parts of Poplar Grove. I also represent the east side of Salt Lake City, so I go all the way to 9th East, and then I go all the way to West Valley. So I have a really interesting district because I represent upper middle class white to communities of color to working poor. So I cover the gamut when it comes to my district. A little bit of background about me. I'm from Tooele, Utah. A lot of people always want to know who I am, where I'm from. And it goes back to my ethnicity. And I'll tell them I'm from Tooele, Utah, born and raised, second generation. And they're like, well, where's your family from? And I have to tell them my family's from New Mexico. And they're like, well, where's your family really from? And I have to remind them that my family was here prior to 1848 in the Treaty of Guadalupe. So the border, my family didn't cross the border, and there's nothing wrong with people who are aspiring to be citizens of the United States. But my family's always been here in the US, and my history has always been here. My dad's Native American, and my mom is Latinx. She identifies as Chicana. And so my family has a strong root here in our country. And why I mention this is because so many times people want other people of color. And so I need to voice that voice to say we're very diverse even amongst our communities. And so it's really important for people to understand our histories, because many of our histories started here in the Southwest. We've always just kind of been here. My background in the legislature always is focused on social justice, particularly around women and women of color. So most of my legislation has focused on human trafficking, domestic violence, and sexual assault. And in 2015, I was able to pass legislation to mandate the testing of all sexual assault kits. And then this last session, I was able to pass legislation to form a murdered and missing Indigenous women and two-spirited people task force. And so that task force is underway. And so my heart, like everyone else who's who's spoken before me has always been on social justice, and environmental justice is also very important to us. As we know, the air we breathe is not the same. The air, if you look at Salt Lake City alone, the air on the west side is dirtier than the air on the east side. And so these are issues, and these are policies that all of us that are here on the call today have always kind of been committed to and focusing on. So not only are we representing our districts, but we're also representing our communities, and we're also educating our colleagues about who we are. Thanks.
Very pertinent. Thank you so much. Last but not the least of our guests, Representative Wheatley.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing us to be here. My name is Mark Wheatley Archuleta, and I represent District 35, which is most of South Salt Lake and the areas of Murray and Mill Creek area. I've been serving in the legislature since 2005. And my background is in education. I spent 16 years with Salt Lake Community College working in administration, took care of their prison education program. I currently serve on the committees, higher education, business and labor, ethics committee. I serve on the Native American Liaison Committee. And so I've also served with the Martin Luther King Commission, the several different entities. So I've been around for a while. I didn't attend the University of Utah. I attended Westminster College, where I met my wife, Josie Valdez. And we've been together for 35 years, and we have 2 sons and 4 grandchildren. And so I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you, Representative. In the interest of time, I'm going to kind of innovate the agenda slightly. I did want to introduce each of our youth that are present here and represented, but I would request them to engage when they speak, to introduce themselves and then ask their questions. I wanted to kind of provide a little bit of perspective of the reason why we wanted to have this call with you guys. You know, in Utah, we talk very proudly about the idea of being refugee friendly. So if you look at the landscape of the refugees in Utah, or if you look at the Black population, sort of all across America, Blacks make about 30% of American Muslims, right? And if you take that formula and apply it here in Utah, most of the African American or Black refugees do identify as Muslims. And I mean, being a Muslim is not a monolith, so it cuts across different identities and everything. We do have youth here, as well as some who are not present today, who've been at the forefront of this racial justice movement at this time. We've had some that want to engage and understand, and there's some who believe that the time for discussion is over. We do think very strongly that, I mean, different reform sort of conversations that are going on will depend on the kind of work you do at the legislature that will trickle down to changes in the law that we need. So before we ask the students and the youth to ask you direct questions, if each one of you can give us in about a minute or a minute and a half the idea of which bills you're running at the moment or planning to that affect these different laws that we feel are harmful for our community. Any one of you can start.
I'll start. So one of the things that I'm looking at doing, and I'm not sure what the bill is going to look like just yet because I'm still in conversation. I have always had an interest in how to keep our young people out of the criminal justice system. And so I have a meeting coming up. Well, push back, rewind a little bit. A couple of years ago, I ran a piece of legislation around to require that SROs have training, cultural training, and require that they also have training with working with kids, young people with mental health issues. And so now we're having conversation around what is the next step. And so within the next 2 weeks, I'm going to be meeting with some members in the community, CCJJ and some other folks. And that's going to be part of the conversation is what is the next step? How do we keep our kids out of this system? And like I said, I don't know what that bill is going to look like just yet, but I know you all can probably expect some more legislation around that.
Thank you for that information. I think the issue of SRO is very important for our community because we do know that, you know, school to prison pipeline exists and it does affect the community, color community much more than white folks. So we appreciate that and we'd love to support you in that bill as it comes out and let us know how to move forward with you on that.
I guess I'll, this Representative Romero, I'll go next. We as a Quad Caucus had kind of outlined a variety of pieces of legislation that we wanted to run. And then I stepped up to look at de-escalation and just kind of examine what kind of de-escalation training we currently have in the state of Utah for law enforcement. And so I'm looking at making sure that that training happens, not just one time, but more than yearly. And we're also looking at some other components when it comes to implicit bias in relationship to that training. And so I'm still kind of tweaking that out. But the other bill that I think is really important, and it's kind of not related to public safety reform, but it's very important to all of us in our communities, consent. With the current administration, Title IX and what we're able to talk about on college campuses has kind of rolled back. And so I'll be running legislation and working with our higher ed institutions to run a bill on how to define what consent is and how we can do more education on our college campuses as well as in our public institutions.
Thank you.
And we've been meeting the Quad Caucus 2 to 3 times a week for what about the past 6 to 8 weeks. And so we all have a list of bills that we kind of have as a priority. And one of the bills that I'm working on is to create a state level review board to define best practices and suggest guidelines for local municipality law enforcement agencies. And we've been getting a lot of support for that. The bill has not been drafted yet, and so we don't know how that looks. But however, we've been talking to the various stakeholders that are involved in it. And I'm always, anytime I propose legislation, I always look at it from an equality standpoint. For the past couple of years, I've been trying to pass legislation that would bring women to equal pay for equal work. And it hasn't gone very far. There's been a lot of people who have been against it, and but I will continue to present it every year until we can hear it on the House floor. So anytime I look at legislation, I look at it from a quality standpoint, make sure everybody's included, make sure everybody's represented, and every voice is heard.
Thank you.
I'll go next. You know, it actually is early in the process as we're working on bills, and bills can take years to actually get to the point where it moves forward. So I'll talk about some of the work that I've done in the past and that I'm continuing to work on. Language equality is a very important thing for me. When I was working with the Center for Ethnic Student Affairs at the University of Utah, when Representative Romero and Senator Escamilla were students there, I began my sort of advocacy in language rights. That this was a time when we, as a state, moved to not have other languages allowed in like translation services. So I've been looking at ways that we can bring more equity to that. I've passed legislation that changed so that our professional licenses can now be taken in different languages. And that was several years' work, and I'm looking, along with my colleagues, to move forward on what are the next steps. We've looked at where we can, I've supported my colleague, Representative Moss, Carol Moss, who passed some legislation on refugee languages for driver's licenses. And so I'm looking at what are our next steps for that. In terms of some of the issues that have come forth with reforms, I'm looking at how we can disallow isn't the right word. There's a police chief who's serving right now who posted on social media some very racist and insightful language. He's currently, this was several years ago, he's currently a police chief because there was not strong enough language to discipline him. So I'm looking at how we can increase that and solidify that language and still honor free speech. And again, this is early in the process in developing this bill, but this is something that I hope that we can close that gap in.
Great. I guess I'm next. So this is Senator Luces Camilla. And so I'll give a little bit of a framework of the process of the Quad Caucus. And I don't know how many of you guys know who the members of the Quad Caucus are. And the Quad Caucus, the name comes from actually the Congressional Quad Caucus, and it's to represent the 4 racial and ethnic minority groups. And so the 6 of us are members of the state legislature that belong to the Quad Caucus is based on our identity to those cultural, racial and ethnic minority groups. So you have 5 of us today in this call. Senator Iwamoto is our other member of the Quad Caucus. And we've been having, conversations on, we were meeting twice a week at the beginning with the COVID-19. As you know, it disproportionately impact communities of color and racial minority communities. We can have a lengthy conversation of that. All of this is tied back to social determinants of health. If you really want to have a conversation about equity and justice, you can separate the health piece and the education piece and police reform and social justice reform and criminal justice reform. They're all tied back to the quality of life of an individual. And so we were focusing, of course, on COVID-19 as it was hitting us in the face. Our hotspots were in our districts. Not only do we live in those communities, but we also, of course, we're hearing from many community members, family members that were getting those COVID-19 positives. And so we started that process right after the session. I want to put also in this conversation the reality that we're facing. We're heading towards a horrible recession, potentially a depression. Financially, we're gonna hurt as a state. Representative Wheatley and myself lived the 2008-2009 recession, which was terrible. We had to cut programs to beyond bare bones. And I want us to get ready because it's going to hit us. We're going to start cutting more programs. We already cut hundreds of millions of dollars from the legislative session that just passed 4 months ago. And we're going to be seeing more budget cuts. So when we're talking about legislation for future legislative sessions, the reality is we're going to be facing very difficult budget decisions because, as you know, the first priority of the state legislature is to balance the budget every year. We make a decision on how we spend every single dollar that the state of Utah has. So when we see those budget reductions and we see our income tax, decrease, our sales tax decrease, we're all going to be hurting. So all this legislation that we're talking about, if it has a cost attached to it, we're going to be facing some challenges beyond just the policy itself. So I want to mention that, not so it's doomsday or for us to get depressed, but just face the reality that here we have a COVID-19 situation, an economic downturn with a terrible recession that we're heading that way. No way that we're going to stop that. And by the way, it was coming before the COVID-19. We were heading towards a recession. And we were trying to figure out some of those pieces, and there was, some reforms attached to tax reform, and we can certainly chat about that. Legislation coming our way. You're going to be voting in November on a constitutional amendment related to education and whether you want to change the fact that our income tax right now is 100% goes to our public education, K-16, to now changing that. And you will see my name as one of the dissent side of that. And hopefully you will analyze this and educate yourself of how I think will negatively impact our children in our state, especially our communities. So that's coming your way in November. So after this whole situation, and we're still facing the COVID-19, and we've been very proactive working on this. And I can tell Representative Romero and myself focusing on the COVID community partnership, Representative Hollands on the homelessness issue that has seen an increase during these times, Representative Karen Kwan working with the first responders and assisting them so they have this infrastructure in place so they can continue to serve us, and Representative Wheatley helping us on the next portion, which is a police reform and the police brutality issue. So of course, our Quad Caucus not only responds immediately, you probably saw some of our statements, and we were very public about how we wanted to be on the front lines addressing this issue as not only legislators of color, but also members of the communities that were being impacted by this. So, we know if you look at data, who those communities are, and it has to do a lot with the color of your skin. So we, of course, jump into this, all of us engaging in conversations, difficult ones, many tears, a lot of anger. And I'm telling you, we all have been involved because we've all been through many of the issues that we're discussing ourselves as private citizens and as individuals. So just know that when these legislators were talking about their bills, it didn't came like last week. These are conversations we've had for years. Representative Hollands made a comment about the bill that we passed during special session, and it may not look like a big lift, but I can tell you that as one of the sponsors of that bill, with Representative Hollands as the chief sponsor, it took a lot of negotiation to put some criminal charges attached to having a peace officer put a knee on someone's neck as a form of restraining. And we can certainly explain the bill because it's pretty technical, but it's a really good piece of legislation. It sets the tone that we're going to keep on fighting for this. Now, you're going to have to see a lot of more bipartisan efforts. As you know, all of us are members of the minority party, and that is a reality. And we know how to count, and we need a specific number of votes in the House and the Senate to pass a bill. My focus on this specific issue related to inequalities and inequities, it's a bill that will bring a task force or an ability to study inequities within our state government systems. So beyond just the criminal justice issues and police reform, but talking about achievement gaps, social determinants of health, I want to see more of a comprehensive approach in a holistic way with regards to social inequities and those disproportionate pieces and social determinants of health. So I'm sorry I went into this broad explanation, but I wanted to put this in context because our reality is with a recession, with a COVID-19 pandemic, and all of the stuff that's happening with social justice and police reform, our ability to, are going to be making decisions that will definitely have an impact on the lives of many. Sorry, I have my 5-year-old here, but this is our new reality, right? So just know that we're working, and we want to hear from all of you because you guys are giving us enough. It's empowering to feel the support of the community. Thank you, Luna.
No, absolutely. And I think you've touched the real sort of important points here. But I do want to speak on behalf of the community saying your work is recognized. That is why we are making an outreach to each one of you We know that you represent us. We know that you take our issues seriously, and we want to stay engaged so that we can also understand how do we support it, and maybe perhaps provide you feedback as to what we are feeling. I do want to open it up for questions from our youth. But before I do that, I want to emphasize that people listening in or watching on Facebook can also ask live questions. If you either put them in the Q&A box or the chat box here or on Facebook Live, we'll be happy to pose those questions to our legislators present here. As for starting the questions, I'm just going to request whoever wants to go first to introduce yourself, where you are in school, and then your question. So please go ahead.
I can start. Hi, my name is Shema. I'm a civic engagement fellow with the Utah Muslim Civic League. I just graduated from the University of Utah. So my question is kind of surrounded on police reform. I know Senator Escamilla, you just touched on it. Many of those in our community, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement, are calling for police reform. And I just want to ask the legislators here, do you think police reform is possible? And do you envision any future legislation to be written on police reform? Thanks.
So I mean, if you guys don't mind, I'll give it a shot here. So Black Lives Matters and NAACP nationally, they came up with, and then I'll talk about the NAACP first, because it was I love their way of approaching this, by the way. They've obviously have done this, for generations, but they came with the 4 items that they wanted to see police reform. And I think most organizations that are on the the more progressive side of saying, look, we want police reform, we want to see some changes, agree that those 4 items are critical. And I can tell you that some of them will be covered in some of the legislation that my colleagues just talked about. So one is the choke one, and that's a little bit more complicated. The way Utah handled that was the knee on the neck, and just know that our conversation will continue on police use of force. And it's a very we can get really technical on this, and we'll love to chat more about it. But the problem is, some of this stuff is really difficult to codify. What is considered too much force, right? So, for example, the knee on the neck was in a way, it sounds simple because if you put a knee on someone's neck, you're basically trying to kill them. So that was, you will think it's a no-brainer. But even there, we were just trying to get to level, having conversations with law enforcement on where do you draw that line between I'm defending myself and here we are in the middle of a, rolling down the stairs on a fight, and you hold someone's neck, and am I going to be charged with a first-degree felony or a second-degree felony? So what we did, and I really, kudos to Representative Hollands, myself, we were the ones negotiating this. What we did is for the first time in our statute, just so you know, in Utah Code, before this legislation, there was no penalty, no criminal penalty for a peace officer at all described in our Utah Code. So this bill brought criminal penalties to peace officers if they do the following. So what we put in place was the following, and it's a tier system. Criminal penalty to peace officers if they do the following. So knee on the neck will give an automatic 3rd-degree felony. Knee on the neck, someone loses conscious, 2nd-degree felony. Knee on the neck, that person dies, is a 1st-degree felony, which is basically murder charges, okay? What we learned from that process, because we wanted to get technical then into the choking, which is just putting someone's hands on the neck, we're going to be working this summer and in conversations about that, because it is very, it gets into some of the training pieces. Even though in policy, we already tell people you should never be choking people. That's not the best way to restrain anyone. There's still some, there's still some agencies that find that to be appropriate if they get certain type of training within martial arts context. So it was very difficult to get to a full-blown agreement, but we did. And it opened the door now for future conversation, and for the fact that now we're going to be providing potentially criminal penalties on actions by peace officers. So when we talk about police reform, I will say we already are in the midst of bringing police reform, because we already did the first step with the knee on the neck. Now, the two other pieces and three other pieces of the NAACP were the Civil Review Board, which Representative Wheatley is already running a statewide mechanism to bring that, because remember, law enforcement, most of the police departments and sheriff's departments are local or within local governments. So the state can certainly bring standards, and that's what Representative Wheatley's bill is going to do, and it's going to be nice because it will be a standard at the state level from a, with review boards that will be assessing actions. And then, of course, you heard from Representative Romero on the de-escalation piece, and that was the third piece of the NAACP items. And the fourth one, which is in actually Senator Iwamoto is the one that's having conversations on this bill, is having a database that it actually is following officers and their actions, right? And we can all make it public. Now, any practitioner from that has any HR backgrounds will know that this is touchy because there's privacy issues related to personnel. And so that is probably going to be a tricky one, but we will get there, where we want to make sure that we are following peace officers. So one of the things I didn't mention is I'm trying to get from the police officer that goes all the way to post for a review on an action or a complaint. And those are very unique cases that don't happen that often at the state level, where a police officer has to sit before or in front of a panel of post, and they're questioning the ability of taking away his license to be a peace officer, his certification. But I want to have more structure on what we're doing on HR issues related to implicit bias. And that is hard because implicit bias is really hard to detect. I mean, we may not even see our own implicit biases, right? So that piece of legislation is working there. So I guess a long answer to your question is we're already moving the needle on this issue, and it's going to be tough, and we're going to need a lot of help, and we will certainly continue the dialogue and encourage the participation, of course, of this organization on the process. We're going to have a meeting pretty soon that you guys are going to be getting an invitation as an organization to have conversations with legislators that are interested on this issue beyond just our quad caucus and more legislators involved.
Thank you. Next question.
I have a follow-up. Yeah. Sorry. My name is Abdi Kadir Eften. I am a fellow with the Utah Muslim Civic League, and I'm a graduate student at the University of Utah. My follow-up question is, to my understanding, I know, when it comes to police reform, I know that, in terms of police training, it's not standardized across the board. So, every single department has their own specific training. So is there any piece of legislation you guys are introducing to sort of have, the training be, all, one single training for all law enforcement? That covers, de-escalation, that covers, chokeholds, stuff like that. And also, I know, I believe Representative Hollands mentioned, she mentioned training hours on diversity. Are you guys able to increase the hours for that? Because it seems like that training is just quick and done. So is there like a bill requiring police officers across the board to increase the number of trainings in terms of diversity? And how do are you guys passing any bills in terms of that?
Yeah, that's going to actually be my bill. And so that's what I'm looking at right now. So peace officers are required to take 4 hours of training, and there's no standard on what that training is. So I'm looking at mandating that they all receive de-escalation training once a year, that they also receive implicit bias training once a year, and community policing. So that's what I'm looking into right now. I'm doing the research, and I want to set a certain standard so it's not just training somebody pulled out of a hat. It's actually, there's a standard there, and it has to meet a certain protocol. So that's what I'm currently working on right now. And as Representative Kwan mentioned, we don't meet until January, and there are 75 members in the House and 29 members in the Senate. And so each of us gets 3 priority bills, and we're understaffed right now. So I'm asking the community to work with us and be patient, but know that sometimes with language, it's going to take a while for us to get the language to our legislation, just because there are our staff are working with not just us, but they're working with the other members of the legislature, and we don't meet until January. But this will give us opportunity to reach out to community, because many times what we hear is, well, why don't we know about this? So we're glad that you're hosting this right now. We're giving people information, and we'll be doing more town halls, and we will appreciate any feedback related to what we're doing. I don't know if Representative Hollands wants to piggyback on that at all, or
No, I think you've kind of summed it up, that we've already begun the process of looking at this and police reform. And this is something that, as one of my colleagues stated earlier, this is something we have been looking at and trying to move the needle on for a long time. I think each one of us, those who are veterans like Senator Camilla and Representative Wheatley, who've been up there a lot longer than some of us, we have been working on this for a long time and trying to push the needle forward. And I think now we've gotten to a point where we have, where the timing is right, where people are open to having these conversations, and we can start moving forward and start moving the needle forward on reform.
Thank you. Next question.
I want to point out just this, with when she mentions that Senator Escamilla and Representative Wheatley have been on, Archuleta Wheatley have been on the front lines, because they have. And it wasn't that long ago that we couldn't even have these conversations in the Utah State Legislature. People wouldn't even our Republican colleagues were not there with us. And so to see what all of you have done by protesting, by demanding action, you've helped move that conversation, so we're actually having them. But I can tell you, when I was an advocate, because I've always been an advocate before I was in the legislature, Senator Escamilla and Representative Wheatley were people we would go to, and they would get threats, and we still get threats, but during that time, it was so anti-immigrant, it was so anti, especially when you're talking about like Latinx and you're talking about the border, and Senator Escamilla and Representative Wheatley were getting death threats. And so I think it's important to have that history and that context to know that many of us have been on the front line, and it might have been a different front line, but it was still a front line, and they've opened those doors for some of us to be able to do what we're doing now.
Thank you. I'm just going to keep rolling with the questions.
Hello, my name is Khadija Khaled. I'm the Racial Justice Fellow at the UMCL. So I just had a follow-up question regarding training. So with the George Floyd death, the officer who knelt on his neck was a superior to the surrounding officers who were the trainees. And they've been on like super recent. But many people would agree that if those officers did speak up about what happened, they probably would have had to deal with severe consequences because of their status difference. Is there a training that allows both superiors and trainees to be listened to when there is an injustice happening instead of being bystanders? And if not, can that be something that is kind of looked into a little bit more? Thank you.
I mean, I'm just going to jump here, and maybe Representative Wheatley and Representative Romero and I actually were in a 4-hour training on de-escalation last night, and was very enlightening. And actually is the statewide de-escalation training that is offered to every peace officer that wants to access, and we'll definitely connect your organization to them, because I think some of you may really be, it's a great education tool, and I think everyone should get some training on, because it's a virtual training, virtual reality training, and you're holding a real firearm, a real Glock 20, 9mm Glock, which is the firearm that most Utah peace officers in Utah use. And I mean, it's a great training. And that piece of your question actually came up, and you're absolutely right. Not even if it's not, they're not trained to do that, to speak up and potentially, especially in a hierarchical level as in law enforcement is. So that's one of the things that to me was very eye-opening yesterday, because we were playing roles in this virtual reality training, and Representative Romero and I were in one specific situation where the reaction was, well, she's the superior and she's the lead on this. How am I supposed to speak up? And so I can tell you that it really caught our attention, and I haven't even thought about it. And I appreciate you talking about this. We're trying to see how we give some protection for because they actually are ostracized, and there's a lot of retaliation when they actually say something. So not only at the moment of at the incident itself, but even in the future, if they file complaints or if they bring up issues to their superiors or supervisors, they tend to have some pushback. So I think it's a worthwhile piece of the conversation that I never thought about it. Really, in reality, until yesterday, where Representative Romero and I were in that scenario ourselves, and we were just in a training, right? And we're so I will definitely put that in, and also will forward the name of this organization, as maybe some of you may want to participate on that de-escalation training, because it also gives you the perspective of reactionary. This is obviously being in those high stressful situations. Our peace officers and police officers are certainly there every single day. That it allows to give a little bit of a different perspective. So Luna will be forwarding your contact info and connecting you with the Attorney General's office. So hopefully you and some of your members can participate of that training. I think you'll find it very helpful.
I appreciate that.
And keep in mind that, along the Wasatch Front, we have Ogden, Salt Lake, and Utah County, where you have a large police force. And some of the, we're a big state, so we have a lot of rural areas, and we have some agencies that only have 5 people. And those 5 people pretty much are going to, according to me, are going to protect themselves and agree with, whatever scenario that they need to agree in. And a lot of them are relatives. They hire their relatives, their neighbors, their small communities. So yeah, that's a very important question. That's something that has to be addressed. But always think about when you talk about the state, we have a lot of rural areas, and they don't see a lot of diversity. They don't see a lot of people of color. They don't see a lot of issues. And so, we really have to advocate and talk to them to make sure that they can agree with us to pass legislation. When we pass legislation, we need 38 votes, 15 votes in 38 in the House, 15 votes in the Senate, and then 1 vote from the governor to become law. And so we always have to work with those legislators in the rural areas to garner their votes to help pass legislation.
The other point I want to make too is if we don't cover every question that you have or ideas that you want to share with us, make sure you reach out to Luna, and she can get that, and she can give you our contact information. And if you want more time to have conversations, that's what we're elected to do, is to have conversations with you and to brainstorm and to hear what you have to say. I run in my full-time job, I oversee a youth council for the city, and a lot of my ideas I get from them. And so for me, everyone's like, "Oh, you're the future," and I'm like, "No, you're the now." And so that's kind of how we look at things, and that's how we work, because we were at one time you, and we were lucky to have mentors like Archie Archuleta and even Frank Cordova and France Davis and other people. You've probably heard their names, and so they mentored us, and so we want to pass that on and be there for you as well.
And I also wanted to bring up that I really appreciate that question, because we often don't remember that many of our police officers are people of color. They're BIPOC too, and so they're in sort of this kind of new territory that they have to navigate, and so we can't just see it from one side. One of the things that I think Senator Escamilla had mentioned that I'm working on is getting more resources, mental health resources, to our first responders, because every day they're out there seeing trauma, and then every day they go back out and they are trying to help our communities. And so we need to make sure that we have, as a state, we have resources for our first responders to continue to do good work. So, yes, there does need to be police reform, but we also need to support the good work that they do. So I really appreciate that question because it demonstrates that especially you brought up the situation in Minneapolis. I believe 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 4 of the officers were of color. So, you know, it complicates that conversation. So anyways.
But just because somebody's a person of color doesn't mean they haven't adopted to the institution. And so many of us really
Yes.
feel like there has to be those cultural shifts within these institutions, because you can fire the whole police force and put communities of color. And if you haven't changed that work culture in that institution, the same thing's going to continue to happen. And so that's why our voices are so important. And that's why we're there, is to bring that alternative opinion, because you can diversify everything, but that doesn't mean you change the culture. And so addressing the culture is critical. And that's something all of us have been working on for years, is putting other voices, you know, and someone's like, well, do you want to be at the table? And like, sometimes we create our own space. When we formed the Quad Caucus based off of our national organizations, we were creating our own space, because guess what? The table wasn't where we want to be, because we want to change things. And so that's why we're doing what we're doing right now, and trying to persevere and push forward.
I absolutely underestimated the need for this conversation and only scheduled an hour with all of you. So I am kind of hyperventilating, trying to get everybody's questions in, but thank you for the offer to take the questions later on too. At this time, I will allow a few more questions very quickly. I'm actually going to take at least 2 questions so that you guys can probably answer in one go.
I have a question. Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me? Because I don't know my name. Awesome. So my name is Marianne, and I'm the current Black Student Union president at the University of Utah. And my question was, you all were talking about like the de-escalation training and task force, and you know, getting the community involved. And my question is just, who will be facilitating these de-escalation trainings? And you know, like, what kind of like, you know, policies or stuff are in place to make sure the person who's facilitating these trainings is facilitating it the right way, and this person has, you know, enough background information about, you know, the Black community and like the BIPOC community, and just making sure that these trainings are going a long way.
And that's what we're
sorry.
yeah.
I'm going to take one more question in,
Okay,
so that you could respond together. Is there anyone?
I have a question. Sorry, my name's Michaela Thompson. I'm in my 2nd year of school. I'll be a junior. I've been pretty active, like at the protests, and I guess my question is just like, because I've seen a lot of like defund the police, and so I just wonder if like what that might look like, defunding the police, and if that's like a better option as opposed to just like retraining the police. And yeah, so I guess I just want to know what the senators think is the best option going forward.
And to add to that, we have 2 questions online from Miss Emma. The first question was, what collaboration is being coordinated by the caucus quad with other community groups who are also working on similar issues, who wish to support your efforts, and who will review the statutes that may need to be challenged or changed?
Let me try and maybe answer some of those. So one is the community engagement on the conversations is a pretty organic process, and it's going to vary based on legislation. I mean, because we are legislators, we're focusing on legislation, right? And the legislative process. I don't want to by no means say that there's no other efforts happening at the local level. You have the council members, and maybe Luna, you guys are going to have one with council members that are also very engaged. We have council members of color that we are actually communicating and trying. Keep in mind, every time we're communicating, it's an extra, you know, meetings, and we're piling up meetings and Zoom meetings. And so I will say this, in order, how do you get engaged? I think if you heard of an issue specific to one of our bills, we enter into now a process of prioritization of legislation. So, we mentioned to you maybe 6 bills tonight. We're probably going to run our own 10 to 15 bills ourselves, aside from those related to our constituency and things that we're working. And it's going to be 1,000 bills. And then we get on a line, we're in a pipeline and a queue process to get our bills. So in order to actually have like drafting in place, that we work with attorneys on the drafting process, takes a while. So people sometimes get very frustrated. We are equally waiting for that draft, and it takes a while. So the process is, and it may take years to get us to pass bills. Who reviews the current code? It's up to the individuals. I mean, I can tell you there's multiple groups that are reviewing code all the time. There is a law enforcement policy committee that is made by the sheriffs, and another one that's made by police chiefs, and another one that's made by more other type of groups. So you have all these multiple groups, and as a legislator, we listen to as many as we can. So I encourage people to engage with the legislator that is working on those issues. There's more than just us working on these issues. And I think Representative Wheatley explained that we're going to need a lot of votes to make a bill pass. The question about defunding the police, and I think Representative Romero will go into the details more on the de-escalation, because that will be her bill and who trains that and everything. But the defunding the police is an interesting concept. And it's like a loaded statement, because I'm still trying to figure out what it means. I mean, I know what it means to defund something. You just remove pieces of budget away from them. The problem is, for example, my district, Representative Hollands, Representative Romero are in my district. We have some very serious issues related to, after Operation Rio Grande, guess where all the homeless individuals are now? In our neighborhoods. So defunding the police, to me, and I by the way, I don't deal with the budget of the police department. That's Salt Lake City and West Valley in my districts. That will be a problem. So I'm not sure when people say, well, defund police, I'm like, can you be more specific? Maybe we need to say reallocate funds on specific areas that are related to law enforcement and public safety, because the police is one portion of a law enforcement budget, right? Law enforcement includes multiple areas beyond a police officer interaction with a person. Public safety is broader than that. So I want to hear more about what that means to people. And I will say, in my district, I can tell you, my community needs law enforcement to protect them, because we're facing serious issues related to homelessness and the criminal activity, because it draws a lot of really bad characters that are providing really serious situations for our community and our safety. So, I mean, I will, maybe more details into what that means. And then engagement, I guess already answered. We will be engaging a lot with the organization, and you'll hear them, and I'm sure Luna will distribute information. The only thing I can add is that as you engage in these conversations with other legislators, some tips. I know Luna knows them because she's an expert with her, as someone that is constantly advocating. But there are certain pieces that I will encourage people to work. You want to establish relationships of respect, and to get to know legislators takes sometimes time. And we are a part-time legislature, so we all have full-time jobs on the side. And I can tell you there's nothing part-time about being a legislator, but because we are working class families, many of us that are in the legislature, and we need more, we can't afford not to work. So I really sometimes, I hate to mention that, but just so you get an idea, a legislator on average in Utah makes about $15,000 a year. So, I mean, 15, so 15,000. So I put that out there. It just, we're not here to talk about wages for legislators, but it just puts a perspective that even if I want to spend a full, more than 40 hours a week, or make it my life, it will be very hard, because I have to pay my mortgage, and I have my husband, I have 6 children. So I mean, just the real life of a working class family. So that's another perspective. So legislators are not full-time. And so you may have to rearrange your timing to talking to them. We don't have a lot of staff either. So that's a reality of a Utah legislature, which is very different from other states, and every state works differently. So I just want to put that out there. I don't know, Representative Romero, I kind of interrupted you.
I want to defer my time over to Representative Hollands.
Well, I'm going to let you speak. I just wanted to clarify something that Senator Camilla said about those experiencing homelessness in our community and the criminal activities. Part of the issue that we are having is we have individuals who are coming into our community who are making it difficult for us, outreach workers, to provide services to those experiencing homelessness. And we have been trying to push for services. In fact, I was able to find up to 25 substance abuse beds for individuals. The problem is getting outreach workers out there without the police being there, because we have individuals who are out there actually threatening the case managers and the social workers who are going into the communities to try to help individuals. And so I just kind of wanted to clarify what Senator Escamilla was talking about, and the reason why we are needing their help and trying to get help to these individuals who actually need these services.
And I think like we're almost out of time, and I can go offline and talk to people about specifics on de-escalation that are interested in and getting your feedback, because that's what I asked for. But I think Representative Hollands raised an important point that's just, it even overshadows police reform. It's this spotlight that's been put on in our country when COVID-19 happened, and then when Mr. Floyd got killed, and when Bernardo was killed. It just showed that there's so much inequality that exists in our communities. There's so many people who are experiencing homelessness because they've experienced trauma, and then they're being re-traumatized by people who are bullying them, and the social workers. There are people that need health insurance, and so many of our colleagues fought Medicaid expansion here. There are so many people who don't have to work 2 or 3 jobs, and they're still not making ends meet. So and there are people who don't have just access to a lot of things. And so what this whole conversation, I know we're talking about police reform, but for me, it's much larger than that. And it's just looking at the inequalities that exist and how people don't have access. Because what's really interesting for many of us, and particularly me, Senator Escamilla, and Representative Hollands, because the districts we represent, we have people who are supposedly allies sending us these nasty emails saying, you don't know anything about social justice. What are you doing for your community? And I'm like, just Google my damn name and you'll see all the work I've been doing. Just Google Representative Holland's damn name and Senator Escamilla's, and you'll see that we've always been on the front line. Maybe we had a different approach than you did, but that didn't mean we weren't there working for our community. So I just want you to, all of you, to remind your friends, your white allies that are out there talking about anti-racism, when they're coming at some of us and telling us how to act. We're brown, we know how to act. We look in the mirror every day, we see who we are. And so I just think that's really important to remind allies when they're talking to, especially us, some of us that are very progressive, legislators of color, research us, find out what we're doing before you point a finger and tell us that we don't care about our communities.
My name is Abed, and I just wanted to get in a quick last question. Which is that District Attorney Sim Gill recently sent a document about his ideas to reform policing in Utah. And I was just wondering, what are your opinions on his ideas? Do you think they're enough? Do you think they don't go far enough? Yeah, thank you.
I've looked at the list. Some are very doable. Some are not going to happen. It's not going to be possible, but it's a beginning. And he's been thinking about this for years since he's been in office. And it's something we have to do as legislators. So I think some of them are very doable, and we're addressing some of those issues, but some of them, I think the document was how many pages? 16? Or he had 16 recommendations, and so
there were like 22 recommendations.
22 recommendations. So I think the ones that are very doable are the ones that we're addressing, and some of the other ones are I don't think they can be done.
Well, can I add something, Mark? I mean, I represent with Lee. So one is, We are actually meeting with Sim, with the district attorney. We met with the attorney general yesterday, which, by the way, the two of them happen to be men of color, right? I mean, our attorney general is Sean Reyes and Sim Gill. You guys know Sim Gill. So, and they've been elected for, a decent amount of years. Sim more. So I'm gonna play a little bit of a devil's advocate on this conversation, because I think one is there is the need to modify code, and one of the things we did with the knee on the neck was clear, right? We, for the first time now, have a criminal charge directly to a peace officer on one activity, right? First time in Utah code, and then. So his question, I think, is a valid question. We are going to go and review the code that says if it's reasonable, what is reasonable or not. And again, it gets complicated. But I also want to put it back to our district attorney and our other prosecutors, because it requires also some, just you have to push it a little bit. And I happen to feel that in some instances, there hasn't been that much of that push on their side and their role as prosecutors. They need the tools, and we're going to work on those tools, and we're meeting with him and listening on what language provides enough tools for a prosecutor to succeed on a case. But I also think that the balance between them as the executive branch and us as the legislative branches, we want to see those cases pushed a little bit more within the framework that we have. But we are going to change stuff. We're going to talk about them. But I also, as we head towards an election in November, and I know your organization is very active in educating and participating on civic engagement, especially during election time, please be reminded that 95% of the legislature is Republican, and they have a super majority, and that creates a challenge on some of these issues that, our streets were filled with people speaking against police brutality and wanting reform. But when it comes to voting day, I'm not sure where they are. And so we need to it has to connect, because it's not connecting. And there's this sense of, really the public doesn't want it because they're not voting, and they're still electing people that don't believe those are priorities. So I will leave that as food for thought as well.
I think, Senator Escamilla, your last comment resonates heavily with us. And I think as an organization, that is one of our focus, to make sure we get community of colors to engage and vote this year, and also participate in census, because that's how we get space on the table. I do want to thank our, the youth that came out and participated. It takes a lot of courage right now to show your face and be able to speak about your beliefs. So I really, really want to thank each one of you. I know there are tons of more questions, and it is my bad that I only allocated an hour. Next time I'll be mindful of that. So I apologize for, having such a short time. And to, all of you legislators, representatives, and senators, I do want to emphasize that we hear you, but we also feel that you're the only ones who have the capacity to listen to us. You are the only one who understand us. And so for us to come to you again and again, consider that as a token of trust and not of being whiners. So, give us that opportunity to make clear as to, when we talk about an issue, how do we come about it? What is our lived experience, and how we would like you to take it up in that manner. So I think, as Senator Escamilla said, it is about building trust. And this is one of the pieces of building that trust with you. So, allow us to keep talking to you. With that, I just want to thank each one of you for making this time, for engaging. I know Zoom calls are, abundant right now, and they take a toll on you. So thank you very much for your time away from your families and talking to us. If any of you have any comments or goodbye, please feel free to say so. As far as I'm concerned, we're complete with our discussion for today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.